Today we're going to be learning Sukkah Daf Kafav. Today's daf is dedicated anonymously in memory of Yaakov Yisrael ben Chaim Peretz, Rav Yaakov Kanievsky, Lestipler. Okay, we are going to now be starting or getting really into this issue of a bunch of different things. Osek b'mitzvah, patram, and a mitzvah, a little bit more in depth. That's what we're going to start with. Then we're going to get into issues about naps, which is going to be interesting. If you are a lover of naps, you might want to be aware of this stuff. Although, as usual, there's many interpretations, so no worries. Let's start from the bottom of Kaf Hei Amud Bet. Tanu Rabbanit. Chatan v'ashushbanin v'cho b'nei achupa p'turim min atfilin u'min atfilah v'chayavim b'kriyat shema. Okay, this Braita says, we're going to start with the first opinion. A chatan and all the people which we were just discussing in the previous section, and all his ushers, his friends that are there to make him happy the whole week of the wedding, and all the bnei chuppah, as the shishbanin are the close friends, the bnei chuppah, other people involved. Pturin, right? Exactly who these categories are is not exactly clear. They're all exempt from tefillah, from tefillin. This is very interesting, right? There's a huge exemption for all these people the whole week from prayer, from tefillin, but yet they're chayavim b'kriyat shema. Just a little bit weird. Didn't we learn the chatan is exempt from kriyat shema? So we're going to talk about this. First, Rashi says, pturim min tefillah. Why is that? To buy kavanah. They need intent, and these people don't have proper intent because they're busy being involved in the partying, and they can't put their minds to have proper kavana in davening. Umina tefillin, Rashi says, mishum deshchicha shichrut vekalut rosh. It's inappropriate to wear tefillin. You have to remember, this will be important throughout our sugya today. People wear tefillin all day long. It's not appropriate to wear tefillin when you're drinking and having fun and being lightheadedness. That's not appropriate. So therefore, they wouldn't wear tefillin. The Beit Yosef says that they're really only exempt from tefillin when they're not davening, but when they're davening and they're saying Kriyat Shema, they obviously have to. This seems a little bit strange in terms of the text that we have, because it sounds like they don't even have to daven. But assuming that, let's say they would have to daven, first of all, in general, we say that nowadays people don't have the same kavanah they did. So any exemptions from kavanah really aren't exemptions anymore. So maybe that's a possible reason. Why, if they can't have intention properly, are they obligated to Kriyat Shema? So Rashi says, the mitzvat kavanah eno ela pasuk rishon. The only real kavanah you need in Kriyat Shema is the first verse. To read one verse of Shema and focus properly, that's not very difficult. Therefore, we require them to do Shema, just not davening. Where does this exemption come from? So it's true that Rashi gives reasons, and maybe that's the reason. Other people say that this Tana holds that osek b'mitzvah is not patur from a mitzvah, and that's why they're obligated in Kriyat Shema, right? Rashi says that's to do with kavanah. Some people say no, it's that osek b'mitzvah is not exempt from a mitzvah. There's other reasons why they're exempt from tefillah and tefillin, because it's not appropriate for them to do it, or they want a proper intent, but not because they're busy with a mitzvah of making the chatan and kala happy, and that's why they're exempt. No, they're not. And in fact, they're not exempt, okay? And the chatan even, who's involved in the mitzvah, is not exempt according to this. Some people say, oh no, well, first of all, the chatan is patra from Kriyat Shema because we must be talking about after the wedding night. The wedding night, yes, he's exempt. That we learned before. This doesn't disagree with that. So there's a debate about whether this contradicts what we saw before. It's a different opinion or not, which would then be interesting. Is there really a machloket about osek b'mitzvah patram and a mitzvah? Others say that this opinion holds osek b'mitzvah is patram and a mitzvah, but in this case you can do both. So you are exempt from Shema technically, but since you can do both, you actually are obligated. So the exemption only kicks in when you can't do both. This sounds more like Tosfot than the Ran, although the Ran actually talks about this as well. So you have to figure out how that works in with his approach. Again, I can't get to everything, but I will mention things minorly. Mishum Rabbi Shila Amru. Now we have a dissenting opinion, or somewhat dissenting. Chatam patur v'ashushbanim b'chol b'nei chuppah chayavim. Now it seems that Rabbi Shila, at least according to Rashi, is only referring to Kriyat Shema. So he says, "Mikriyat Shema detarid shar b'nei chuppah chayavim." Because right, v'leit lehu lahane tanai osek b'mitzvah patram min mitzvah. Now they say this is Rashi's interpretation that is only from Kriyat Shema, although I think everybody thinks that we're only talking about Kriyat Shema. When it comes to Kriyat Shema, it's true, they said everyone's obligated, but it's not including the chatan. It's just talking about everybody else. Really, the chatan would be exempt because he's tarud b'mitzvah. But if you're just osek b'mitzvah, that's not enough, and that wouldn't exempt you. Tanya, Amal Rabbi Chananya ben Akafia. So now we bring another braita about osek b'mitzvah patur min mitzvah, and this is really very far-reaching. Just as the first one was, right? If you hold that osek b'mitzvah is patur min mitzvah, that's why you're exempt from davening and tefillin, and it's only if you really can't do both, then we can use huge exemptions, basically, if you're learning, let's say. So it sounds like you're busy learning. You wouldn't have to daven that day. If you're going to, now obviously, if you're going to take a big break and not learn all the time, and that's where this actually comes into play, right? Or let's say let's read the next case and then I'll give you another example. Amar Rabbi Chananya ben Akavia, kotvei sfarin tefillin umezuzot. Okay, so for Stam, it's busy writing Sifrei Torah, tefillin, mezuzahs, them, vitagrehem, and those who sell their stuff, vitagrehem, in other words, middlemen, or someone who sells to someone else who sells them. V'chol haoskim b'melechet shamayim, and anyone somehow involved in this. Now, the question is, are they actually doing a mitzvah? They're really enabling others to do a mitzvah by selling Sifrei Torah, selling mezuzot. They're actually themselves not necessarily doing a mitzvah. Maybe the person writing it, you could say, is doing a mitzvah. If you say it's a mitzvah to write a Sifrei Torah or mezuzah, but the people selling it for sure not. This is interesting. La tuye and kolos kim melechat shamayim. What would that be? La tuye. They're taking a break in the Braita for a minute to explain to you what that includes. La tuye mochrei tchelet. Even people selling tchelet, they're enabling people to put tchelet in their tzitzit. Pturin mikriyat shema umin tefillah umin tefillin. They're exempt from kriyat shema, from davening, umin tefillin, and from tefillin, umikol mitzvot amurot b'Torah. In any mitzvah, it says in the Torah, l'kayem divrei Rabbi Yossi Aglili. This is to support or to fulfill what Rabbi Yossi Aglili says. Shaya Rabbi Yossi Aglili omer osek b'mitzvah patur min mitzvah. Anyone involved in a mitzvah is exempt from a mitzvah. Wow, this is far-reaching. So anyone who's selling Sifrei Torah is allowed to not daven, not wear tefillin, not say kriyat shema. Seems very extreme. So in fact, there's a lot said about this. Some people say, by the way, if they're doing it just to make money, then it doesn't count, which is obviously, it's interesting because whoever's selling obviously is doing it to make money, but maybe a matter of profit, how much profit? I don't know. It's an interesting question. There's all different opinions here. The question is, how far do we take this? This sounds like, right? And what's the halacha about this? As I told you, the Beit Yosef says that it's only, right, that the issue is only tefillin, and it's only not to wear tefillin all day long, but you have to wear it actually when you're davening. But the Ramah says that while they're actually busy working, they are actually exempt from mitzvot. You have to be busy, engaged in your job. So this again begs the question, what if you're on vacation and the next day you're backlogged from a lot of things and you sit and work all day writing Sifrei Torah? Is that considered that you don't have time to daven? You had time yesterday. In other words, you could have done more yesterday and less today, right? And where do you draw the line? You could be doing this all day, but you do take breaks, right? It's very tricky to understand what it actually means to be doing this all the time, that you actually don't have time for davening. Okay, there was a story, now I'm blanking on who it was, but he was teaching in the yeshiva and he stopped in the middle and said kriyat shema, right? So we do see that people did stop mitzvot to do it. So, the question is, if you can't do both, but the question is, what does it mean to not do both? I mean, you can always continue learning more and more and more, but you can also take a break. Yes, it's true. You'll be learning less. So if I'm busy, let's say preparing for the daf and I do it all morning long, does that mean, or teaching and then preparing, does that mean I don't have to daven, right? It comes to very interesting conclusions that you'd be surprised about, that you would think this isn't really the case, but it seems that maybe the clear the halacha is, right? So the Ramah basically says that while they're engaged in their work, they don't have to. Okay. But he does add, though, that if you can do it without too much effort, then you obviously should do both. So he does add that to say, well, and that's probably why we all side on doing all the mitzvot, because it's not the biggest deal to take a break and go back to your work after. Anyway, it's a very fascinating sugya in terms of mitzvot, and it changes a little bit our perspective of what you might think, right? That for the clear cut, the bottom line halacha, it kind of sounds like you really could be exempt, which is really interesting. Okay, moving on now. Tanu Rabbanan. Holchei drachim bayom pturim min Sukkah bayom v'chayavin balayla. If you're traveling during the day, then you're exempt from Sukkah during the day. If you're traveling at night, then you're exempt. You're exempt during the day, but obligated at night. Holchei drachim balayla. If you're traveling at night, then you're exempt from Sukkah at night. But you're obligated when you're not traveling during the day. These are not people on the way to do a mitzvah. These are just travelers. If you're traveling day and night, then you're exempt in general. But if you're on your way to do a mitzvah, okay, then you're exempt during the day and at night. Okay, now again, this is, second, there's a big question about this. Rashi says, even if they're only going during the day. Why? And therefore, the assumption is they're busy and focused on doing their mitzvah. So even when they're not actually moving, they're still exempt from the mitzvah. But there's three opinions here, really, and I wanted to bring them. Rabbi Avram Minahal says that he's always considered mitasek b'mitzvah. And you're busy with the mitzvah, whether or not you're actually on your way or not. The Ran says only if doing the mitzvah of Sukkah is going to be a burden for you. But if it's not going to be a burden for you, even if you're busy with the mitzvah and you could just sit in a Sukkah, it's no skin off your back, so then sit in the Sukkah. Tosfot says only if the Sukkah is going to get in the way of your Kiyum mitzvah. It's not, he goes farther to say not just it's a headache to do it, but more so that it's going to prevent you. It's going to get in the way of your doing the mitzvah. Then, right, like let's say there's no sukkahs on the way, and therefore you're not going to be able to go because there's no sukkah, so then you're allowed. But not if you can actually do the mitzvah and go in the sukkah. Even if going in the sukkah is going to be a bit of a headache for you, you're still obligated. So there's all different ways of viewing this exemption. It's not as clear cut according to all the commentaries as it might seem here. Now they're going to bring a case to prove this. When they would go on the Shabbat of the Regel, this is a big deal. They would always go to the house of the Reish Galuta, the exilarch. Havugan, right? He's the person who was in charge in Bavel, like one of these political leaders. Havuganu, and he's also often a Talmid Chacham as well. Havuganu arakta de Sura. They would sleep on the banks of the river of Sura. Amre, anan shluchei mitzvah, ananu p'tulim. They would say, listen, we're on the way to do a mitzvah because we're going to our, so to speak, rabbi, right? As I said, the Reish Galuta was a Talmid Chacham as well. We're going to learn there, and therefore we're exempt. Or just to visit him is even a mitzvah in and of itself. Tanu Rabbanan. Another braita about who's exempt from Sukkah at what time. Shomrei ha'ir p'turim min ha'sukkah bayom v'chayavim balayla. If you're protecting the city, so you're exempt from Sukkah during the day. The assumption is you wander around. I think Rashi says it. No, Rashi doesn't say it here, but they say, some people say that they're talking about people who are watching from other armies attacking, and they have to wander around, so they can't have an obligation of Sukkah because they're never in one place. But they're chayavim balayla because they're not guards at night. Shomrei ha'ir balayla, the ones who protect the city at night, p'turim min ha'sukkah balayla v'chayavim bayom. So the reverse is true. They're not exempt at night, but they're obligated during the day. If you watch, you guard both, you take the day shift and the night shift. This is very clear. You're then exempt both day and night. Same thing. Okay, but here they're now going to say, if you're watching over the fields, then in the orchards, then pturim bein bayom ubein balayla. Then you're exempt both during the day and at night. Okay, and these are because they go. Okay, Rashi says, well, what's the difference between them? Rashi says, ein zazim misham, because they're guards during the day and the night, and therefore they don't have to do sukkah either which way. So it's really no different than the others. So now they say, but wait a minute. If you're a guard out in the fields, why don't you just make a sukkah where you are and sleep there or sit there and eat there? You're supposed to sit in the sukkah in the way that you sit in your house. Now, this means that you're supposed to then bring all your utensils in and you're supposed to treat your sukkah as if it's your house. Now, you can't do that if you're all the way out in the fields. Remember that we've learned this before. The fields were outside the city. You'd have to bring all your stuff to make it like a house. You can't possibly do that. It's a huge schlep. You're not going to do that. So therefore, you don't have to. You could also explain it as Teshvu Kein Tadul, which means you're not sleeping at home, so then you don't have to sleep in the sukkah. It's only like the choleh, we said, the same kind of thing. That you'd have to do it in a way that you would do at home, and you wouldn't necessarily be sleeping at home, so you don't have to sleep in the sukkah. So two different ways of understanding. Rav Amar, he gives a different reason. Pirtza Korah Leganav. If you're a guard, you have to be moving from place to place. If you put your base in the sukkah, everyone's going to know that you're not watching the other part of the field, and then they'll go and steal stuff from the other side. So it's not the kind of job that you can actually be in one place. So because of that, right, you're kind of begging for robbers to come, and your whole job is to prevent from robbers. So now the Gemara says, "My benai, what's the difference between Abaye and Rava? If you're watching a pile of fruits that's only in one place, then you can actually build a sukkah and still protect it." Cholim umesham shehem. What kind of chole are we talking about? That's exempt from sukkah. Tanu Rabbanan, chole shamru lo chole sheyesh bo sakana. Not someone who's in dire, dying from what they're sick with, which obviously would be exempt from sukkah. It's not that it doesn't apply. It just means ela afilu chole she'ein bo sakana. Even someone who's not in danger. Afilu chash be'einav, afilu chash be'rosho. Even if your eyes are bothering you or you have a headache. Amar Rashbag. Now we're going to see an example. Pam achat chashti be'enai be'kesri v'yitir Rabbi Yossi be'Rebbe lishon aniu misham shai chutz l'sukkah. One time I was having an eye issue, and in Caesarea, and Rabbi Yossi be'Rebbe permitted me to sleep in the sukkah, sleep outside the sukkah, me and the people who were helping me. Rav Shara l'Rav Acha bar dela lemigna b'chil to b'sukkah. He allowed him to sleep. This is a different thing. He allowed him to sleep in a kila, in a protected area within the sukkah, which we talked about had issues before, or possible issues, mishum baki, because of mosquitoes. Okay, the mosquitoes were biting him, so he allowed him to put a net on top of him to protect him. Rav Asharele Rabbi Acha bar Ada lemigna bar metalata. He allowed Rav Acha bar Ada to sleep outside the sukkah. Rav allowed this. Mishum sircha degargishta. Okay, we're giving all different reasons here. It's not just because someone who's sick, giving other reasons for either the mosquitoes are biting you, it's uncomfortable, or there's this horrible stench of the ground. Because of this horrible stench, he allowed him to sleep outside the sukkah because it's unpleasant to be in the sukkah. Rava l'ta'ameh da'amarava bitstar patur min sukkah. This is a very famous halacha that a mitzvah is patur from sukkah. Okay, Rav is the one who says it. If you notice, it didn't appear in our Mishnah. Okay, right? Our Mishnah yesterday talked about shluchei mitzvah cholinu misham shehen. It didn't talk about mitzvah, right? We kind of always have this in our head. Mitzvah is patur from a sukkah. If you're uncomfortable, you don't have to be in the sukkah. This is Rava's halacha, much later than the Tanaim, right? Fourth generation Amoraim. He's the one who said it, and that's why he allowed Rav Acha bar Ada to sleep outside the sukkah where there was this terrible stench. Now, what's this issue of mitzvah patur min sukkah? So halachically, we paskin that you actually, on the first night, you have to eat in the sukkah. You have to at least eat a kazayid, okay? And that just because you say I'm uncomfortable doesn't mean you really don't have to sit in a sukkah, right? How many times I've been in a sukkah where the sun is beating down and it's not the most comfortable, but you pull it together and you manage, right? So the first night is more of a mitzvah than all the other nights to make an effort to sit in there, even if it's uncomfortable. But there is actually this exemption. If the sukkah is making you uncomfortable, then you're allowed to be outside the sukkah. But doesn't it say, which sounds like chole im mitzvah lo? Now they say, but look, it didn't say it in the Mishnah. It only said someone who's sick. It didn't say someone who's uncomfortable. So they say, amrei cholehu hu umisham shav ptule, mitzvah hu patur misham shav lo. So a sick person, not only him, but also his servants. By the way, before we explained it as it was someone who was kind of helping the sick person. But now we're going to see it's really the people who are around him, the people who work for him. So if someone's sick, then all of the people who work for him don't need to be in the sukkah. But if someone's uncomfortable, then he's exempt, but his servants are not exempt. Okay? They have to sleep in the sukkah or eat in the sukkah. Moving on to the eating in the sukkah. We're going to deal with this topic of arai. What does it mean, arai? Okay, temporary. What does it mean, a light meal, a snack? Where do you draw the line? Very good question, right? V'kama achilat arai. Amar Rav Yosef, tarte utzlat bei, 2 or 3 egg bulks. Amar Abaye, Kiditam Farber Rav. Oh, sorry, I skipped a line. Amar Abaye, V'hazimnin Sagian Sagale Linashe Bahachi, Vavele Sudat Keva. Some people eat 2 to 3 egg bulks, and that's a full meal for them. Ela Amar Abaye. Abaye says, no, it's not that. It's Kiditam Farber Rav V'aya Lakala. When the rabbis would eat something before they would go, the students would eat something before they would go to the drasha in the morning. They would just eat a little bite to keep them going before the end of the drasha. That's the amount of food. Obviously, doesn't give us an amount. We don't really know what this amount is, but it's obviously smaller than 2 or 3 eggs. Tanu Rabbanan, Braita about this. Ochlim achilat arai chutz l'sukkah ve'ein yishenim shenat arai chutz l'sukkah. I told you we get to naps, so you can eat a basic, right, any kind of eating, like a snack kind of meal outside the sukkah. But you can't sleep a nap. You can't take a nap outside the sukkah. Why is this? My timer. Whenever you go to sleep, you never really know how long you're going to sleep. You might go in for a little nap and you might wake up 3 hours later, and then that will be a serious deep sleep. But wait, there's a different braita where it seems to distinguish, and there is such a concept of achilat, of shenat arai, of napping. That's a light nap. So how can you possibly say there isn't? Right? He questions Rava. So now we're going to say, he questions Rav Ashi. So now we're going to say, Ditanya, Yashen Adam Shenat Arai b'tefillin. The main topic where sleep comes up is tefillin. There's always a concern. 2 possible things might happen while you're sleeping, right? You're a man. What could happen? Number 1, you could let out gas, which would be inappropriate while you're wearing tefillin. Number 2, you might have tumakeri. You might have a seminal emission, which could happen when you're sleeping. So the Braita says, you can sleep shenat arai in tefillin, aval lo shenat keva. So now, according to what you said, Rav Ashi, lichus shema yeredem, why can you sleep? The assumption is in the shenat arai, a little nap, neither is going to happen. It's too short. What do you mean it's too short? Maybe you'll get into a deep sleep, as Rav Ashi said by Sukkah. Why would it be any different when it comes to tefillin? It's the same nap. So Amar Rav Yosef berei de Rav Ilai b'moser shenato la'achirim. It's a case where you go in for a nap and you say to someone, please make sure to wake me up. Sounds familiar. It happens in my house on Shabbat. Right? My daughter will go to sleep and she has to be somewhere at 5. She says to me, please make sure to wake me up. Now, here comes the next. Right? What's the obvious problem here? Matkifla Rav Misharshia aravach arvat sarich. But your arev, your guarantor, right? She asked me to wake her up. What happens if I need someone to guarantee that I won't fall asleep? Right? Maybe I'll fall asleep. Why do I give the example on Shabbat? Because first of all, more likely people are napping in my house on Shabbat. And number 2, there's no way to set an alarm. So here she tells me, wake her up. There's 2 problems, not just that I might actually fall asleep, which is a possibility, but more likely, which is what usually happens in this scenario, I forget to wake her up, right? She tells me, wake me up at 5 and I'm not paying attention to the time and I don't realize, and 5 comes and goes and, it's 5:30 and then I feel terrible because I forgot to wake her up. It's usually what goes on in my house. But in any case, the point is, it doesn't help if someone says they're going to wake you up very shortly because they might forget, they might fall asleep. They need someone else to make sure they don't fall asleep. So a different answer. Why are you allowed to sleep shenat arai in tefillin, but not in sukkah? It's talking about that braita when they said you can sleep shenat arai. It wasn't talking about you get into bed and you go to sleep, but you put your head down on your knees. In other words, right, you stick your head down on the table. If you sleep at the table, it's very likely you're going to sleep for a long time. There are some people who might actually, but usually if you fall asleep at the table, right, or sitting up, you're not going to really sleep for a long time. So it depends on what position you're in. If you're lying down in a bed, it's very possible, right? How many times do you go in for a nap and think I'm going to sleep for 10 minutes and you end up falling asleep, right? What I do is I don't like to take a long nap on Shabbat because then I have a hard time waking up from my nap. So what do? I sleep on the couch. If I sleep on the couch, I know I'm not going to sleep more than 15 minutes. But if I sleep in my bed, I'll more likely sleep for a long time. Rava Amar ein keva l'shena. Rava says there's just no such thing as keva for shena. There is no such thing. In other words, he's saying, one second, ein keva l'shena. Rava says we're not worried. Okay, now this is going back to the earlier part. So we tried to give reasons why someone can't, why you can't sleep shenat arai outside the sukkah. And he says there is no such thing as keva for shena. Okay, meaning there's any kind of sleep this is what, right? You ever Power nap. What's a power nap? Power nap is a good solid sleep of 5 minutes, but it was only 5 minutes, but it was keva. It was serious. So he basically says, right, ein keva l'shena really means there is no set amount that's going to turn it into keva, but any kind of sleep is actually serious. Okay. So now that's a different reason. He's not addressing the tefillin issue. He's really only addressing the sukkah issue, why you have to sleep in the sukkah even when you're napping, because any kind of sleep is considered serious. Even it could be a 5-minute nap, but it's a power nap and it gives you the energy you need. So that's considered sleep. Again, it's very interesting, these different approaches to napping. Okay, now we're going to have a problem with tefillin. There's going to be 3 different brightot that all seem to contradict each other. Tani Chada, one says, Yashen adam b'tefillin shenat araya v'lo shenat keva. You can sleep in tefillin only if you're doing a light sleep, but not if you're doing a heavy sleep, a serious sleep. Tani idach, bein keva bein araya. Another one says, it doesn't matter. You can do either. V'tanya idach, lo keva v'lo arai. You can't do either. So now we have 3 different brightos. What do we mean? So the Gemara says lo kashya. It depends. There's no argument here. Each is describing a different scenario. What does it mean to sleep with tefillin? Sleep with tefillin doesn't necessarily mean the tefillin is on you. The tefillin could be next to you. Could be, let's see, all the different options. Ha dinakale biyade. Okay, the most strict is if you're holding it in your hand, because the worry is that while you're sleeping, you might drop them on the floor. So therefore, if you're holding them in your hand, that's a problem, right? Rashi says, lo keva v'lo arai shema yiplu miyado, they might fall. Ha demanche bereshe, if you have them on your head, then Rashi says, arai mutar v'keva asur shema yafiach. We're worried you might let out gas or possibly have a seminal emission, but we're not worried about that when it comes to shenat arai. So if it's on your head, you're allowed to go for a little teeny nap. And then the third is ha de paris sudre ilave. You can sleep even shenat keva. That's when you put it next to you and you cover it with something. That's different. That doesn't mean your tefillin's not on you. Your tefillin is next to you and covered by something. Then we're not worried at all. We're not worried you're going to drop it. We're not worried that it's on you. And if you might let out gas, it's not a problem because it's covered. The cover protects it. The kama shenat arai. Now, here comes the big question. How long is shenat arai? What's considered a light nap? Tani Rami Bar Yechezkel Kadei Hiluch Mea Amat. How long it would take you to walk 100 amot, 100 cubits. Okay, that's like a cubit is about a step. So it's 100 steps. That's not very long. Tanya Nami Hachi, here's a brighta to support this. First, we're going to see something else in the beginning of this brighta, and then we'll get to the line we're looking for, which is that it's shenat arai, is how long it takes to walk 100 cubits. Tanya Nami Hachi Hayashem b'tfilin. If you're sleeping with tefillin bero'eh keri, what happens if what you're expecting, right, what you're worried about actually happens? You're sleeping with your tefillin, you fall asleep somehow, and then you have a seminal emission. What do you do? At this point, you become impure, you're a Baal Kethi. You can't touch the tefillin, but you have to get them off of you immediately because you can't have a seminal emission while you're wearing your tefillin. So what do? You can hold the straps and pull it off using the straps, but you can't touch the tefillin themselves, not the box of tefillin. Divrei Rabbi Yaakov. The Chachamim omrim, Yashen adam b'tefillin shenat arai, aval lo shenat keva. Okay, the rabbis say you can sleep a light sleep, but you can't sleep a heavy sleep. Doesn't sound like he's actually disagreeing. He's just talking about the halacha. V'kama shenat arai, and how much is this? This is what we were looking for. Kedei hiluch mea amad. The amount it would take you to walk 100 cubits. Amarav. Asur, here we get to napping in general. Are naps permitted? Are they looked at as a good thing or a bad thing? Asur la'adam lishon b'yom yoter mishenat hasus. He says one cannot sleep more than a horse sleeps. Horses are known not to sleep very long. They take short naps. V'kama shenat hasus. How much is this? Shitin nishme, 60 breaths. Okay, this is a classic. Nobody knows what to make of this. What exactly are 60 breaths? How much time? There's a range from 3.3 minutes to half an hour to 3 hours. Okay, that's a big difference. So if you're a person who loves naps, then go with the 3-hour option. If you're a person who doesn't love naps, then go with the 3.3 minute option. Anyway, it's not so clear how long this is. Now let's keep reading. Amar Abaye. I was going to give an example of someone who slept during the day as little as a horse, or a few people. Shinte Demal. Mar is always Rabba. He talks about Rabba as Mar. That was the one who adopted him. Kid Rav. He took naps like Rav did. For Rav, Kid Uderav, Kid Rebbe. He took naps like Rebbe. Uderebi, Kid David. He took naps like David HaMelech. This is a little bit in terms of who are the important people throughout the generations. David HaMelech, then we jump to Rabbi Yehuda Nasi. We jump from there to Rav, from there to Rabba. It's almost this way of saying, here's these are the greatest scholars that were, and they each were very careful about naps. The David Kedesusia. And David was slept like a horse, took naps like a horse. Udesusia Shita Nishme. And that's 60 breaths. Abai have a naim, Kedema'al mi pubedita lebe kuche. So Abaye fell asleep. Okay, maybe we should, I'm trying to think, do they talk about this? No. So let's just go into why one should not nap. Okay, what's the issue with napping? So some people say the issue with napping is that, there's a few reasons. Okay, one is that, look at Rashi for a minute. Lisham bayom mipnei bitul Torah. This is very simply, it's because you're not learning Torah. Okay, now let's say you don't learn Torah during the day. So, or you learned your part and you're not planning to learn anymore. So maybe you could nap according to Rashi, right? It's a good question. But the Meiri says, and this makes a lot more sense, that one should use one's day constructively. So whether it's, working, learning, all that, sleep just gets in the way of that. If you just sleep your day away, you're going to not be productive. So that's really his issue, which is very interesting. There's another opinion which talks about that sleep is 1/60th of death, and therefore you should avoid it as much as possible. That's a whole interesting thing. Like we do it every night, but maybe you should avoid it during the day because it brings upon, it was this fear that it brought upon death. That's a whole different category of issue here. So it's very interesting to think about, this approach to naps of the rabbis. Okay, let's move on to Abaye. So Abaye now says, Abaye have a naim kidma'ayel. He was sleeping. 1 second. Right. He slept. Sorry, I didn't read it right. Let's go back. Abaye, sorry, lost my place. Abaye have a naim kidma'al mi pubedita lebekubi. He slept the amount of time it takes to go from pubedita to bekubi. Like we were saying, they measured. I didn't really talk about this, but they often measured time in distance it takes to go from one place to the other, right? We do it the opposite. We have time, and then we're always calculating, right? You put on Waze all the time. How long is it going to take me to get there? But this is the opposite. They knew how long it took to get from place to place, and that's how they talked about time. They said the time is, right? You think about a little kid. Like a little kid doesn't understand the concept of time. So if you want to say 5 minutes to the kid, you say the amount of time it would take you to, do the following, whatever it might be, that would take 5 minutes. And that would make more sense to them. That's how the rabbis define time. It's also another interesting thing in today's daf. So he says, that's how long he would sleep. He read the following verse from Mishlei, which is, how long are you going to be so lazy and, just sleep your life away? It's not looked at as a good thing. Tanu Rabbanit. Hanichnas lisham bayom. So now, what are you supposed to do with your tefillin if you go to take a nap during the day? Ratza choletz, ratza meniach. You could take it off, or you could leave your tefillin on. Balayla choletz ve'eno meniach. At night, you have to take it off. You can't leave it on. Tivrei Rabbanit. That sounds pretty obvious. Although, the day, questionable, because we talked about shein arai, whether you could or not. Although we did seem to say that it was okay when it comes to tefillin. Right? It's hard to imagine sleeping in tefillin and forget about what we're going to see soon. This, you'll see a really extreme case that you imagine, how could you possibly do this? But you have to remember that in their days, they often wore tefillin all day long. If you wear tefillin all day long, you start to not pay attention to it and not even realize it's on you. So let's keep going. Rabbi Yossi Omer, hayeladim le'olam chotzim be'ein naminichim. The younger children always have to take their tefillin off and can't leave them on, mipnei sheregilim betumah, because they often have seminal emissions, and therefore we have to be worried. So now they say, why is he always worried about this for young kids? Right? What does he mean by hayeladim also? So let's see. Or is this to say that Rabbi Yossi holds Baal Keri asur laniach tefillin, that he thinks that it's because of Baal Keri can't put tefillin on, he's worried that his children are Baal Keri. So Amar Abaye beyeladim v'nishotehem imahem askinan. Is it that he's worried that the children are already Baal Keri? So they say, no. We're talking about young married people. Okay. Yeladim unishotehem imahem, and they're going to take a nap with their wives. Askinan shema yavo lidei hergel daval. Specifically, young marrieds are more likely, if they take a nap during the day, to actually have relations with their wives. And because they're young marrieds, right? They're more into that possibility of that happening. Whereas, people who are married for a long time, it's unlikely that's going to happen. So therefore, If you're young and you go in for a nap, you're a young married, you have to take your tefillin off because there's a concern that you might have relations and then you'll become a Baal Keri. And then you won't be able to have your tefillin on anymore. Tanu Rabbanit. Shachach v'shimesh mitato. Now, this is really what I was getting at, that if you don't take off your tefillin, you might end up having relations. You'll kind of forget that you have tefillin on you. And that's this case, this braita. You totally forgot you were wearing tefillin and you have relations with your wife wearing tefillin, b'tefillin. What do? Eino ochez, this is just like before. If you had a seminal emission, it's the same thing. Eino ochez lo b'ritzua lo b'tzitza ad she'itol yadav yitzlem. First, you have to wash your hands. In this case, you actually have to wash your hands first. Okay, v'yitzleim, and then you should take them off. And it could be they touched something, and that was, it could have been they touched the semen, and therefore you should be concerned not to touch your tefillin at all, even the straps. Okay, in this case, we're more strict about it. That's a very strange case to think that someone would do that. But again, as I said before, you have to understand the reality was possibly quite different than ours because they wore tefillin every day. They just didn't even realize that they were wearing them. Right? To us, it's impossible to imagine someone would actually do that. Mishnah. Okay, now we're moving back to this eating arai. That we got into this topic because we were talking about eating arai, and then we moved to sleeping arai because sleeping and eating in the sukkah are both the main mitzvot. So now we're going to talk about eating in the sukkah, and we're going to have a new Mishnah about this. So now the Mishnah already said, you go back to the previous Mishnah on Kaf Hamid Aleph, it said, Uchlin v'shotin arai chutz l'sukkah. You can eat and drink snack food, right? Light meals outside the sukkah. We've seen this before. It actually got quoted in, I believe it was in Yoma. Yeah, in Yoma. The end of Yoma, we saw this story when we were talking about the measurements. They brought Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai lit'om et hatavshil, to taste a cooked food. That sounds like arai, right? This is why we had it, because of the two dates. Udli shalmayim, and a bucket of water. Va'amru he'elum l'sukkah. And Rabban Gamliel and Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai said, bring it to the sukkah. Now, this is strange. This seems contradictory to what we just said, because you would think you didn't have to eat this in the sukkah. When they gave him food less than a kibetza, we're going to assume it was bread. Nitalo b'mapa, he took it in a mapa. Okay, meaning, now why? He thought that you didn't actually have to wash your hands for less than a kibetza. Why not? Well, the reason you wash your hands is because of tuma, impurity. And if you remember, there's this whole debate about whether food can become impure, whether it needs a kibetza to become impure, or it can become impure at any amount, and it's only kibetza to pass on impurity. But if you hold it can only become impure at a kibetza, then he held, you don't need to wash your hands because it can't even become impure at less than a kibetza. That's one way of reading him. Another way is that he held this machloket about Birkat Hamazon. Do you have to do a bracha achrona, benching after meals, after eating a kibetza or a kazayit? If you say kibetza, so some people say that's what he held. He held it was a kibetza. And because of that, he said that there was a direct link between benching and washing hands before the meal. You only have to wash your hands before the meal if you actually have to bench. If you eat less than that, then you don't. Right? We hold nowadays that if you eat a kazayit or even less, you bench without washing. Okay, I'm sorry, you wash without, I said that the wrong way. You wash netilat yadayim, you don't say a bracha. If you're only going to eat less than a kazayit, then you wash without a blessing. And that kind of comes from here, this issue. So why did he take it in a mapa? Because his hands might have been dirty. Okay, but it's not because it should have had netilat yadayim and he didn't have water, and that's why he held it. Because some people say if you can't get water, then you hold it, right? It's really only if there's really no water anywhere. But that's not the issue here. Here, he didn't think you actually needed to wash your hands. But that's not important for our purposes. The important part is he ate it outside the sukkah, and he didn't make a blessing after. He didn't make a bracha achrona on it, okay? Because it was not enough to make a bracha achrona. There you see he holds that way, that a beitza would require a blessing after. But the main thing is he ate it outside the sukkah, a kibetza, okay? Now, I'm sorry, it was less than a kibetza. That was the whole idea. So that seems to say arai is less than a kibetza, right? And you can eat it outside the sukkah. So we're going to have a few questions on this Mishnah, because the first part seemed to indicate you do need to eat arai in the sukkah because they went and brought it in the sukkah. So the Gemara questions, Maaseh listol, is this action, this maaseh, this story of Rabban Gamliel and Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai that brought their food into the sukkah, even though it was just a snack or a tasting, right? For Rabban Gamliel, it was just tasting something. Then then based on that, do you need to, according to this, are we saying it's not true that you can eat arai outside the sukkah. So they say, no, it's missing words, and this is how it should be read. You can be machmir in this area, and there's no issue of yohora. Yohora is kind of showing off and saying, oh, I'm better than you. There's no issue of that. You're allowed to sleep. You're allowed to eat even a snack in the sukkah, and it doesn't look like you're bragging and showing off, I'm better. Nami, and then additionally, so here it comes, that's the lead into right? And then, okay, and then we have the continuation, which is okay. So then we have the continuation, which is they were machmir, but Rabbi Tzadok did according to the Beis Halacha. Okay, we have a little bit more to finish up on this, but we'll leave it for tomorrow because it's tomorrow's daf, and then we will get to the new Mishnah. Have a great day, everyone.